Saddam's entire military and security forces were trained by the Soviets.
My name is Trevor Loudon. I've made it my life's mission to confront and expose America's enemies.
The word Chechnya certainly rings bells.
Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin have chosen to use as the instrument of their projection of power Muslim terrorist organizations.
If America ever falls, so does every other free country, including my home country of New Zealand. President Trump's executive order suspending travel from 7 Muslim-majority countries sparked a storm of protests and rallies at airports all over the country.
The protests were swift.
Thousands of people show up just to make their voices heard.
President Trump's recent missile attack on an airbase in Russian puppet state Syria has further inflamed passions. These uprisings were portrayed in the mainstream media as righteous indignation for the plight of refugees.
They will use victimization, calling Americans as bigots.
But our research has discovered a much more complicated reality.
Over 100 demos in 42 states. These are in major cities, but also smaller town airports as well.
We discovered networks of radicals unified by one central force.
The main event isn't ISIS over there, it is the Brotherhood here.
Since the dawn of the Soviet era, the communist government worked hard to co-opt and control the large Muslim populations within their borders.
It's a 100-year history. The Bolsheviks first tried to wipe out religion. They failed. So after Lenin, the Soviets sought to try to co-opt religion however they could. Water it down, Sovietize it, put it under control.
They co-opted Islam, or at least tried to use it to further their goals.
Soviet communism's stated goal was always world domination. Moscow needed the Middle East for naval access to the Mediterranean and to choke off European supply lines by closing the vital Suez Canal. To this end, Iran, Syria, Iraq and Egypt were all brought under Soviet control. Today, Moscow is using its Iranian, Syrian, communist and terrorist allies to restore Russian control over the Middle East as a stepping stone for further conquests.
After World War II, the Soviets began co-opting international religious Christian movements, as well as Muslim movements. And they began trying to work with Islamist movements that had no sympathy for communism, but had a common cause against the West.
What the Soviet Union used to do, and very cleverly I guess we could say, is to offer scholarships and schooling to many from what we would call the Third World. But also other kind of training was provided. There was specific guerrilla and terrorist training in explosives, in small arms, in guerrilla tactics, sabotage, assassination. That is the connection for the PLO and Yasser Arafat.
At the same time, the Soviets also co-opted the Egyptian-founded terrorist organization, the Muslim Brotherhood.
The Muslim Brotherhood, which was created to restore the caliphate, finds its roots in countries that were under British or French control or domination, such as Egypt. They became independent, but they were still pro-Western countries. So the Soviet role was to try to promote radicalization of Islamic sects and movements and schools.
So the Muslim Brotherhood hooked up at some point with the KGB, didn't it?
As best we can tell, what happened is that during World War II, when the Nazis were fighting the Soviet Union, the Nazis recruited as spies and intelligence assets a number of Muslims from within the Soviet Union, particularly the stands, as we call them. Now, of course, the Nazis lost the war. And after the war, other victorious, different intelligence services picked up those networks of assets. The wartime OSS of the United States, Office of Strategic Services, which becomes the CIA, picks up some of these networks, some of these intelligence assets. And it is to be expected that the KGB, that is the Soviet intelligence service, picked up yet others.
The Muslim Brotherhood structure is remarkably similar to that of the old Soviet Comintern and the later network in the 1970s and 80s of the Soviet International Front organizations and communist parties. So if you were to draw side-by-side charts of the International Muslim Brotherhood and the Soviet International Communist Party and Front organization networks, you'll find a remarkable overlap.
Soviet Islam gained an American foothold in the early 1960s. Two Communist Party supporters, Richard Durham and John Woodford, took over the editorship of the Nation of Islam's Mohammed Speaks. Thousands of American Muslims were soon reading Soviet propaganda disguised as Islamic thought. In the 1970s, the Soviets worked hard to expand their influence into the Muslim world. The former head of the Romanian KGB, Ion Pacepa, has revealed how he worked with the head of the Soviet KGB, Yuri Andropov, to send 4,000 agents into the Muslim world. They were armed with anti-American and anti-Semitic literature, such as the secret protocols of the learned elders of Zion, designed to stir up hatred against America and Israel. America would now be bogged down fighting a new enemy, diverting attention away from Russia itself. In 2006, Soviet intelligence defector Alexander Litvinenko died of thallium poisoning in a London hospital. According to a British government report, he was almost certainly murdered on the orders of Vladimir Putin. Many believe that his main crime was revealing that Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of al-Qaeda, was trained by Russian intelligence in Dagestan in 1998. In recent years, Russian leadership has organized several major conferences to solidify Islamic support for Vladimir Putin.
Russia and the Islamic world. This forum is one of the largest events held by the Muslim community in the country. It's meant to show that Russia, with its 23 million Muslims, wants to strengthen ties with the Islamic world.
Today, Russian Islam is completely under the control of the Putin regime. For many years, one Islamic republic, Chechnya, fought hard to break away from Russia. But now, under Putin-appointed President Kadyrov, Chechnya is a loyal servant of Moscow. Putin has used Chechen troops in his invasion of the Ukraine.
Российский народ объединился вокруг своего лидера Владимира. Я уверен, что мы с вами твердо находимся на пути Всевышнего Аллаха и его посланника, саллаллаху алейхи вассалям. Врага России, где бы он ни был, мы встретим его же. Да здравствует наша великая Родина России! Да здравствует наш национальный лидер России Владимир Путин! Аллаху Акбар! Аллаху Акбар!
Internationally, the Soviet Union and now Russia have always controlled much of what we now call Islamic terrorism.
If you look at Chechnya, from the Boston bombings to the ISIS movement in Syria, has large connections to movements of Chechnyan jihadist fighters in there, and yet Russia's with us against ISIS.
Even ISIS is led by Chechens and former Soviet-trained Iraqi intelligence officers.
Saddam's entire military and security forces were trained by the Soviets. They were recruited by the Soviets. They were brought to different parts of the Soviet Union for their training and indoctrination, and the most reliable ones in Soviet eyes were recruited as GRU military intelligence agents or KGB foreign intelligence agents. So it makes perfect sense.
Russia has played both sides of the game, where they've allowed Chechnyan jihadists to come into Syria, move a justification for military onslaughts into neighborhoods like where my family live. Russia, 90% of its bombing is not in areas of ISIS. It's in areas of the rebellion against Assad that are a bigger threat to Assad than the militant ISIS radicals in the northeast of Syria.
Soviet-trained Palestinian terrorist Carlos the Jackal is still serving time in a French jail, where he wrote, "Only a coalition of Islamists and Marxists can destroy the United States." Our research reveals that many of today's American Muslim leaders owe more to communism than they do to Islam. Prominent activist Nihad Awad is a major leader of the American Muslim Brotherhood movement.
So you had the International Association for Palestine, which was a Soviet International Front organization specifically to support the PLO. And in the United States and some other countries, it was the General Union of Palestinian Students, which was the national chapter or national affiliate of that Soviet Front organization. So Nihad Awad led that. So when Soviet support for it dried up, who's left to support these guys? Muslim Brotherhood comes in. Awad moves over from a Soviet-backed entity to a Muslim Brotherhood entity, Hamas.
I used to support the PLO, and I used to be the president of the General Union of Palestine Students, which is part of the PLO here in the United States. But after I researched the situation inside Palestine and outside, I'm in support of the Hamas movement.
Nihad Awad was a member of the Islamic Association for Palestine, or he showed up in meetings regarding the Islamic Association for Palestine in 1993 that the FBI wiretapped because they were concerned it was a Hamas meeting to coordinate stuff having to do with Hamas, which a couple of years later was designated as a terrorist organization. Nihad Awad and Akbar Ahmed and a man named Marzouk were the leaders of this IAP. When the pressure got pretty intense, Marzouk headed back to the Palestinian territories, and he became the #3 person for Hamas. And then Akbar Ahmad and Nihad Awad founded CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations.
And since that time, Nihad Awad and Ibrahim Hooper and others that have been running CARE have said, well, the entire identity of Muslims in America is about protecting our civil rights. So they will use victimization, calling Americans as bigots, and fill the bandwidth of attention of America to Islam with Muslims as being the victims. And they'll condemn terror here or there, but then forget whether they are actually countering the ideology.
CARE is a Sharia promotion organization masquerading as a civil rights organization.
Is CARE an influential organization?
Well, it's influential in setting policy and scaring governments out of conducting investigations of mosques. Basically, they're there to intimidate the authorities into not investigating areas where the authorities ought to investigate.
Islam is peace.
They have people showing up in Ferguson, they have people operating in Washington, D.C. on legislation, and they're integrating narratives at international forums.
Attorney Lamis Deek is a CARE New York board member and a militant anti-Israel activist. In court, Lamis Deek has defended student supporters of the Maoist Freedom Road Socialist Organization.
We don't have the ability yet to wage a military struggle. Arms up, shoot back! Arms up, shoot back! Arms up, shoot back!
As well as failed bomber Ahmed Ferhani.
The Algerian-born Ferhani was arrested after buying guns and a grenade from police. Ferhani pleaded guilty to terrorism charges and stated, "By targeting a synagogue, I intended to create chaos and send a message of intimidation and coercion to the Jewish population of New York City."
This was a case that was clearly a case of entrapment, a plot that was initiated and manufactured by the NYPD.
We can tell people in New York that our freedom fighters are not terrorists. We call them the People's Defense Police.
Lamis Deek is also prominent in the Freedom Road front group Ungovernable, which pledges to create a resistance movement which makes Trump unable to govern. Brooklyn-born Linda Sarsour leads the Arab American Association of New York.
She is also an identity movement monger. She shifts from either helping the Islamists to helping sort of the Arab movement.
A former White House champion of change, Linda Sarsour has boasted of 2 relatives serving time in Israeli jails for terrorist offences. Linda Sarsour supports CARE.
If there was something called the CARE Defense League of America, Linda Sarsour would be the president of it.
And opposes President Trump.
Fascism is already in the White House. Fascism is already in power.
In January 2017, Linda Sarsour and Carmen Perez, who had recently joined the Freedom Road front group Dream Defenders on a trip to Palestine, were lead organisers of the Women's March on Washington. March sponsors included CARE, the Communist Party USA, and several Freedom Road front groups. Speakers included Communist Party leader Judith LeBlanc, a fan of Yasser Arafat, and Linda Sarsour herself.
The very things that you were outraged by during this election season, the Muslim registry program, the banning of the Muslims, the dehumanization of the communities that I come from, that has been our reality for the past 15 years.
Linda Sarsour now serves as an advisor to the socialist organisation Dream Defenders, led by Miami lawyer Ahmad Abouznaid. Ahmad Abouznaid grew up in East Jerusalem. There he met Yasser Arafat, as his father served as a political advisor to the terrorist leader. Abouznaid now leads the Dream Defenders, who believe that their liberation can only come after the destruction of capitalism, imperialism, and patriarchy.
Hold the state of Israel accountable. Yes, Zionism is racism, is colonialism, is fascism. Liberation cannot come until Zionism is utterly destroyed.
The days of the U.S. operating as an international gangster are over. Power to the people. Power to the people.
Ahmad Abouznaid has led 2 Black Lives Matter delegations to the Palestinian territories. Tour guide for the second trip was Mahmoud Jadar, a former member of the terrorist Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Rami Nashashibi is a former member of President Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based Initiatives. He leads the Inner City Muslim Action Network, which partners with the highly influential Muslim Brotherhood front group, Islamic Society of North America. A latecomer to Islam.
While I was not brought up religious, I certainly was cognizant of political struggle at a very young age.
Nashashibi comes from a highly political Jordanian family. His grandfather was a leader of the Jordanian Soviet Friendship Society. His father, Ali Ma, studied in Moscow and served as a Jordanian diplomat in communist Romania.
Here to remind Donald Trump that the American Muslim community, although we have been horrified by the violence that his rhetoric has incited across the country, that we are not intimidated by him.
Soviet Islam's Muslim Brotherhood branch has also gained huge influence across America.
The Muslim Brotherhood formally began establishing its front groups in the United States, with the first one, the Muslim Student Association, on the campus of the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana in 1963. And, you know, from that point forward until now, the MSA has expanded to many hundreds of chapters across academia in America.
More than a dozen US communist groups are active in the Islamic movement, but Freedom Road Socialist Organization and its spin-off Fight Back are the best connected. In Chicago, Hatem Aboudeya of the Arab American Action Network is a long-time Freedom Road Fight Back supporter. He is a leader of the anti-travel ban campaign and works closely with Fight Back leader Joe Eisbaker.
Israel is living on stolen land, and
Abu Daya and Iosbaker led a nationwide campaign to save another fightback supporter, Razmaya O'Day, from deportation. In the 1960s, Razmaya O'Day was a young member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
Hey, don't man.
In 1969, Razmaya O'Day was jailed in Israel for helping to plant 12 pounds of dynamite into a cookie tin in the Super Soul supermarket in West Jerusalem. The bomb exploded, killing 2 young friends, Edward Joffe and Leon Canner. After 10 years in jail, Razmaya O'Day was freed in a prisoner swap. She moved to America but neglected to tell immigration authorities about her terrorist convictions. O'Day has a friend in Ahmad Abusniad, and Joe Iosbaker has enlisted his allies in the Putin-funded anti-globalization movement of Russia to her cause.
I will not describe to you the torture that the Israeli Defense Force guards performed on Rasmia. I will just tell you that the Israeli guards behaved as animals.
In March 2017, Razmaya O'Day reached a plea deal with federal prosecutors. While she was able to avoid additional jail time for her immigration fraud, the former Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine terrorist is set to be deported from the United States. Abu Daya was himself raided by the FBI in 2010, along with more than 20 Freedom Road members, for alleged support for terrorist activities in the Palestinian territories. America is now under siege by foreign powers who have co-opted elements of Islam and weaponized it in their battles against the West.
The Soviet Union in its time, Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin today, have chosen to use as the instrument of their projection of power the co-option of Muslim terrorist organizations.
The main event, the center of their whole operation, isn't ISIS over there, it is the Brotherhood here.
Much of what we now call radical Islam is in fact Marxism-Leninism with a Muslim veneer.
I, as an intelligence officer analyzing this activity in a foreign country, we'd say there's an insurgency.
How many people are going to die in supermarkets and sports stadiums and social gatherings because we failed to act now to stop this problem?
You see this heightened violence because President Trump disrupted a glide path that they thought they were on.
If we do nothing, where are these people going to be in 10 years' time? What influence will they have? What damage will they be able to do to your country, to your lifestyle, to your children's future?
One of the key objectives of an insurgency warfare is to get the public to lose faith in their government and in their society so that they will want to fold.
Out of the collapse of societal order would come a situation that they could take advantage of and impose what they see as the ideal world order. And it would be one without borders. It would be one of redistribution of wealth from those who have it to those who don't. And it would be a very different place than the system of nation states that we have now.
Things have really changed in this country. Remember when it was easy to travel in airports? Remember when there was no climate of fear? Remember when terrorism was something that happened in foreign countries?
There's no guarantee that just because we are Western civilization, just because we are America, that it can't happen to us.
Do we take the opportunity to get on top of this problem now, or do we kick the can down the road and let our children deal with it?
We need to understand that we have something special. We have something exceptional in our system that needs to be defended.
If we really want to win the war on terror, do we concentrate on the volunteers, the fighters in the field, or should we be looking at their puppet masters? Are we going to spend more blood and treasure fighting the terrorists in the Middle East, or are we actually going to have the courage to go to the head of this octopus? Are we going to actually confront Vladimir Putin and the KGB superstate he leads from the Kremlin in Moscow? God bless you all. Thank you.